Most people have no idea they're losing power in public every single day, not because they're weak, unintelligent, or unlucky, but because they unknowingly expose too much of themselves to the wrong people. And the strange part, society actually encourages it. Speak more. Share everything. Express every emotion. Reveal your plans. Seek validation. Be completely open. Sounds healthy, right? Well, Machiavelli would probably laugh at that advice, because throughout history, the people who truly understood psychology knew one dangerous truth. The world often studies your vulnerability long before it rewards your honesty. Think about it carefully. Why do some people walk into a room and instantly command respect without saying much? Why do calm individuals often seem more powerful than loud ones? And why do certain people always end up manipulated, underestimated, or emotionally exhausted no matter how good they are? The answer usually isn't luck. It's emotional control. Most people are fighting invisible battles they don't even realize exist. Every reaction, every complaint, every unnecessary explanation quietly tells the world how to handle them. Meanwhile, the people who master silence learn something the average person misses completely. Mystery protects energy. Modern life turned exposure into entertainment. People announce goals before taking action. They reveal insecurities to strangers online. They seek validation from audiences that secretly enjoy watching them fail. And little by little, they surrender control of their own emotional state without noticing it happening. Machiavelli warned about this centuries ago, long before social media existed. He understood that human nature doesn't change as much as people think. Envy still exists. Manipulation still exists. Emotional weakness still attracts opportunists. The battlefield simply became digital now. Same game, different costumes. But here's the paradox nobody talks about openly. Becoming more private doesn't make someone weaker. It often makes them untouchable. The less emotionally reactive a person becomes, the harder they are to manipulate. The less they seek approval, the more naturally respected they appear. And the moment someone stops explaining themselves constantly, people suddenly start paying closer attention to their presence. That's the ironic psychology of power. Silence speaks loudly in a world addicted to noise. In this video, the speaker will reveal the 9 public mistakes that silently destroy influence, weaken emotional authority, and expose hidden vulnerability without people realizing it. Some of these behaviors seem harmless at first. Others are so socially normalized that most people never question them at all. But once someone understands these patterns, they begin seeing social interactions very differently. And honestly, after learning this, it becomes impossible not to notice who controls themselves and who is controlled by everyone around them. Most people walk into public spaces thinking they're entering normal conversations, casual meetings, harmless interactions. But the wise observer notices something deeper happening underneath the smiles and polite words. Every room becomes a silent battlefield of psychology, where people instinctively measure power, confidence, control, and vulnerability without even realizing it. A man may laugh loudly at dinner while secretly testing who feels insecure enough to seek validation from the table. A woman may stay quiet during an argument, yet silently dominate the emotional atmosphere simply because she refuses to react. That's the strange thing Machiavelli understood centuries ago. People rarely reveal their intentions directly. Instead, they study reactions, emotional cracks, hesitation, nervous energy, and the person who exposes too much too quickly usually loses influence before the game even begins. The speaker explains that modern society rewards exposure while secretly punishing it at the same time. Social media taught people to broadcast emotions, frustrations, victories, heartbreaks, and future plans like an open diary. But in reality, excessive transparency often weakens personal power instead of strengthening connection. Someone announces a new business idea online, and suddenly everybody has opinions, doubts, sarcasm, or hidden envy. Another person shares every emotional wound publicly hoping for validation, only to realize later that some listeners quietly store those weaknesses for future advantage. It sounds cold, sure, but human psychology has always worked this way. Machiavelli never saw silence as emptiness. He saw it as armor. Mystery forces people to observe you carefully, while oversharing hands them the map to your emotional world. There's also a subtle difference between confidence and emotional leakage that most people never notice. Confident individuals don't rush to explain themselves all the time. They don't feel pressured to narrate every dream, every insecurity, or every internal conflict just to feel accepted. Think about the calm person in a tense room. While everyone competes for attention, they simply observe. That silence creates curiosity. People begin projecting strength onto them because emotional control naturally attracts respect. Ironically, the loudest person often feels the weakest internally. The constant need to prove intelligence, status, or importance usually hides fear beneath the surface. True power rarely screams. It simply stands still, while chaos reveals everyone else. A mentor once compared social interactions to a poker table in Las Vegas. The amateur player keeps showing emotional reactions after every card, while the experienced one reveals almost nothing. Same cards, completely different outcomes. Life works similarly. When someone instantly reacts with anger, desperation, excitement, or insecurity, they unconsciously surrender control of the interaction. Manipulative personalities watch these signals carefully. They study patterns. They notice who needs validation, who fears rejection, who talks too much when nervous. And honestly, most people expose themselves within 5 minutes of conversation without realizing it. That's why emotional discipline feels almost supernatural today. In a noisy world addicted to constant expression, calm silence becomes unforgettable. Another uncomfortable truth appears here. Vulnerability is valuable in the right environment, but dangerous in the wrong one. The internet romanticizes emotional exposure as universal strength, yet reality is far more complicated. Sharing pain with trustworthy people can heal. Sharing it carelessly with strangers, opportunists, or competitive environments can quietly damage your position. Machiavelli understood that human beings often admire strength publicly while exploiting weakness privately. Harsh, maybe, but everyday examples prove it constantly. At work, the employee who constantly complains about stress slowly loses authority in the eyes of others. In friendships, the person who overshares insecurities sometimes becomes the target of subtle disrespect disguised as jokes. Psychology teaches that people respond not only to words, but to emotional signals beneath them. What makes this battlefield truly invisible is that most battles happen internally before they happen externally. A person loses influence long before anyone attacks them directly. They lose it the moment they desperately seek approval, react impulsively, or expose emotions without discernment. That's why mastering silence is not about becoming cold or emotionless. It's about choosing carefully what deserves exposure and what deserves protection. Even ancient rulers understood that mystery creates presence. When people can't easily predict your reactions, they hesitate before underestimating you. And, strangely enough, once someone learns to control what leaves their mouth, they begin noticing another dangerous habit. Most people never question the urge to publicly announce every plan before it even becomes real. There's a strange phenomenon in human psychology that almost nobody talks about openly. The moment a person announces a goal too early, part of their emotional energy disappears. It's as if the brain mistakes talking for doing. Machiavelli understood that words create exposure before results create respect. Someone says they're starting a business, writing a book, transforming their body, or changing their life, and suddenly the world begins interfering. Some people will smile while secretly doubting them. Others will offer fake encouragement mixed with subtle negativity. And a few, believe it or not, will quietly hope they fail just to protect their own ego. That's why real power often moves in silence long before success becomes visible. The seed grows underground first. The speaker explains that secrecy is not paranoia. It's strategic emotional control. A disciplined person learns to separate intention from performance. They stop seeking validation for unfinished dreams because they realize applause before achievement is dangerously addictive. Think about the athlete who posts motivational quotes every day, but never trains consistently. Or the entrepreneur who talks endlessly about future success while avoiding uncomfortable work. Deep down, public attention gives them temporary emotional satisfaction, and that fake reward weakens action. Meanwhile, the quiet individual keeps building in private, without emotional noise. Months later, results appear almost suddenly to outsiders. But nothing was sudden. Silence protected the process, while everybody else wasted energy performing ambition instead of living it. Complaining publicly creates a similar trap, though most people don't notice it happening. Of course, everybody feels pain, frustration, exhaustion, disappointment. That's part of life. But constantly broadcasting suffering changes how people perceive someone over time. Human psychology naturally associates repeated complaining with helplessness, even when the complaints are justified. A man who constantly talks about unfair bosses slowly loses authority in conversations. A woman who endlessly complains about betrayal sometimes attracts people who see her vulnerability as an opening for manipulation instead of empathy. Machiavelli would probably say this sounds cruel, but reality rarely rewards emotional exposure the way motivational culture promises. Dignity during hardship often creates more respect than endless explanation ever will. That doesn't mean pretending life is perfect like some fake internet guru wearing sunglasses indoors. Not at all. Emotional honesty matters. But there's a difference between seeking wisdom and rehearsing victimhood every day. One strengthens the mind. The other slowly trains hopelessness into identity. A wise mentor once said something funny but painfully true. Some people don't need solutions anymore. They just upgraded complaining into a full-time podcast. And honestly, everybody knows someone like that. They repeat the same frustrations for years, while rejecting every path forward. Real control begins when a person asks quietly, "What can I actually change right now?" instead of asking the world to constantly validate their suffering. There's also another hidden danger in revealing plans too early. It exposes timing. Once people know your next move, they unconsciously begin calculating around it. Competitive coworkers may sabotage opportunities. Jealous acquaintances may discourage you with disguised concern. Even friends with good intentions can unintentionally plant doubt through fear-based advice. That's why powerful individuals throughout history protected their next steps carefully. Not because they hated people, but because they understood human nature. Silence creates flexibility. It allows adaptation without public pressure. When nobody knows your strategy, nobody can emotionally corner you inside expectations. And strangely enough, the less someone announces, the more magnetic their eventual success becomes. The deeper lesson here isn't about becoming emotionally distant from everyone. It's about understanding where true validation should come from. A person who constantly needs public approval for every decision eventually loses ownership of their own direction. They begin adjusting dreams according to reactions instead of convictions. That's dangerous, because the crowd changes opinions every week, sometimes every hour. One day they cheer, the next day they disappear. Real power grows when somebody learns to move quietly, endure privately, and let results speak with undeniable force. And once someone masters that level of restraint, another challenge begins appearing almost immediately. Learning how to control emotional reactions when pressure, disrespect, and conflict finally arrive face to face. Before we continue, let me tell you something important. Most men go through life feeling invisible, not because they lack value, but because nobody ever taught them the hidden psychology behind power, silence, emotional control, and social influence. That's exactly why I created the Silent Influence Code. How to make people respect, desire, and follow you without saying a word. Inside, you'll discover the same psychological triggers high-status men use to command attention, create attraction, and influence people naturally, without chasing validation or begging to be noticed. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or ignored, this will completely change the way you see human interaction. The link is in the pinned comment. Trust me, once you understand this, you'll never walk into a room the same way again. One of the fastest ways to lose power in public is surprisingly simple: emotional loss of control. Most people think strength means speaking louder, reacting faster, or winning arguments aggressively. But psychology usually works the opposite way. The person who loses emotional balance first often loses influence first, too. Machiavelli understood that anger reveals information. A sudden outburst exposes insecurity, impatience, ego wounds, and hidden vulnerability all at once. Meanwhile, calm silence creates uncertainty. It unsettles people because they can't easily predict what comes next. That's why emotionally disciplined individuals often appear more intimidating without even raising their voice. Their control becomes impossible to manipulate. The speaker explains that emotional reactions are like open windows into the mind. When somebody instantly explodes during criticism, observers unconsciously identify emotional weak spots. A manipulative person pays close attention to these moments. They notice which words trigger insecurity, which situations create desperation, which comments destroy composure. That's why self-mastery matters so much in social dynamics. Imagine two co-workers receiving unfair criticism in a meeting. One becomes defensive immediately, interrupts angrily, and spends 20 minutes trying to prove innocence. The other listens calmly, responds briefly, and keeps emotional posture intact. Ironically, the calm person often appears stronger and more trustworthy, even before anyone knows who was actually right. Human psychology constantly interprets emotional behavior as hidden information. Calmness, however, should never be confused with emotional suppression. That's where many people misunderstand the lesson completely. Real control does not mean becoming emotionally numb like a robot from a low-budget sci-fi movie. It means choosing timing wisely instead of surrendering reactions impulsively. A wise person still feels frustration, disappointment, embarrassment, even rage sometimes. The difference is that they don't hand those emotions to the room immediately. They process internally first. They observe before reacting. That small pause changes everything. In modern culture, instant emotional expression gets celebrated constantly. But Machiavellian thinking warns that immediate reactions often place others in control of your state of mind. Another behavior the speaker criticizes strongly is excessive apologizing. And honestly, this one makes many good-hearted people uncomfortable. Saying sorry for genuine mistakes shows maturity, but apologizing constantly for existing, speaking, asking questions, or taking space slowly destroys perceived confidence. Some people apologize before every sentence, like they need permission just to breathe. Sorry for bothering you. Sorry if this sounds stupid. Sorry for taking your time. Over time, this language conditions others to subconsciously lower their respect. Why? Because repeated unnecessary apologies signal low internal validation. They communicate insecurity, even when no offense exists. The person unintentionally teaches others that their presence carries less value. A mentor once shared a practical exercise that sounds small but changes social energy almost immediately. For 1 week, replace unnecessary apologies with gratitude or direct communication. Instead of saying, "Sorry for being late," say, "Thank you for waiting." Instead of, "Sorry to bother you," say, "I appreciate your time." The emotional shift feels subtle at first, but it changes posture internally. It reinforces self-respect instead of automatic guilt. Psychology responds strongly to language patterns because words shape emotional identity over time. People who constantly apologize often grew up associating peace with self-minimization. But adulthood requires a different form of control, one rooted in calm confidence rather than fear of disapproval. The deeper truth hidden here is uncomfortable but powerful. People often treat individuals according to the emotional standards those individuals set for themselves. Someone who panics easily, over-explains constantly, and apologizes excessively, unconsciously, invites manipulation from stronger personalities. Meanwhile, a calm person who speaks carefully and reacts slowly creates natural boundaries without even demanding them verbally. That's the strange paradox Machiavelli hinted at centuries ago. The less emotionally reactive someone becomes, the harder they are to control. And once a person learns to protect emotions publicly, another dangerous temptation appears quietly in the background. The temptation to reveal too much about money, opinions, and private beliefs to the wrong audience. Few things change human behavior faster than money. The moment people believe someone has wealth, their attitude shifts almost automatically. Some become overly friendly, Others grow resentful without admitting it. And if they suspect financial struggle, respect can quietly disappear from the interaction altogether. That's why the speaker warns against discussing money openly. Machiavelli understood that financial information alters social psychology in dangerous ways. Too much wealth attracts envy, expectation, manipulation, and hidden competition. Too little invites judgment, pity, or subtle disrespect. Real power often protects itself through silence, allowing people to focus on actions instead of numbers attached to identity. The wise person learns that privacy creates emotional freedom. Someone who constantly displays luxury online may receive attention, but attention is not always respect. Sometimes it's surveillance, disguised as admiration. Think about the person who suddenly starts posting expensive purchases, vacations, designer clothes, or business success everywhere. At first, validation pours in. Compliments, praise, curiosity, but quietly, comparison begins growing inside other people too. Friends start competing emotionally. Family members develop expectations. Opportunists appear out of nowhere with suspicious kindness. Human vulnerability increases when financial visibility becomes excessive because money amplifies projection. People stop seeing the individual clearly and start seeing what they can gain, imitate, or resent. The conversation then moves toward gossip, which Machiavelli would probably view as one of the weakest forms of social behavior. Gossip feels powerful temporarily because it creates artificial connection. Two people bond quickly while discussing someone else's flaws. But there's always a hidden cost. Psychology remembers patterns. A person who speaks negatively about everyone eventually becomes perceived as unsafe by everyone too. Even listeners who laugh along quietly wonder, what does this person say about me when I leave? That's the irony of gossip. It rarely destroys the target as much as it destroys trust in the speaker. Truly influential individuals often listen more than they talk because information flows toward silence naturally. A mentor once described gossip with a simple analogy that stuck forever. He said gossip is like borrowing confidence using somebody else's reputation as collateral. For a few moments, people feel included, superior, entertained. But eventually, emotional debt arrives. Drama spreads, trust weakens. Respect disappears slowly. Meanwhile, the quiet observer keeps learning everything without exposing much at all. That person becomes difficult to manipulate because they collect information while revealing very little emotionally. In social environments, listening is often underestimated as a form of control. The loudest voice usually reveals the most weakness. The calm listener quietly understands the entire room before anyone notices. The speaker also warns against constantly preaching personal philosophies, beliefs, or moral superiority publicly. This surprises many people because modern culture encourages endless broadcasting of opinions. But Machiavellian thinking argues that actions carry far more power than declarations. Someone who constantly announces their values often seeks validation more than transformation. A person says they believe in discipline but lacks consistency. Another speaks endlessly about loyalty while betraying people privately. Words become performance. Real character appears in repeated behavior, not public speeches. That's why wise individuals rarely feel pressured to convince everybody about who they are. Their habits communicate more clearly than arguments ever could. And honestly, there's something strangely magnetic about people who don't feel the need to explain everything. They move quietly. They avoid gossip. They protect financial privacy. They let actions reveal philosophy naturally over time. This creates mystery, emotional stability, and respect simultaneously. Because once someone stops chasing attention through opinions, complaints, or exposure, they begin noticing another hidden addiction controlling modern life entirely: the desperate need for external validation from other people just to feel worthy. One of the most invisible forms of control happens when a person's self-worth depends entirely on other people's reactions. The speaker argues that constant validation seeking quietly transfers power away from the individual and places it into the hands of the crowd. A compliment creates happiness. A criticism destroys confidence. A lack of attention suddenly feels like rejection. And without realizing it, many people spend years emotionally controlled by external approval. Machiavelli understood something uncomfortable about human psychology. The person who desperately needs acceptance becomes easy to manipulate. Why? Because fear of disapproval makes them predictable. They begin adjusting personality, opinions, appearance, even dreams, just to avoid losing social comfort. Modern culture intensifies this problem constantly. Social media transformed validation into a daily emotional currency. Likes, comments, views, reactions, they all create tiny psychological rewards that train dependency over time. Someone posts a photo and checks the phone every 10 minutes. Another shares opinions, not because they believe them deeply, but because they know the audience will applaud. It sounds harmless at first, but slowly the mind stops asking, "What do I truly think?" and starts asking, "What will people approve of?" That shift changes identity from the inside out. Real power disappears whenever someone needs permission from strangers just to feel valuable. Silence becomes impossible because attention itself turns into addiction. The speaker also explains that public vulnerability can become dangerous when shared without discernment. This idea often gets misunderstood, especially today when emotional exposure is celebrated everywhere online. Vulnerability with trustworthy people creates connection, healing, intimacy. But public emotional exposure without boundaries sometimes attracts manipulation instead of support. A person openly reveals insecurities, heartbreaks, fears, loneliness, or emotional wounds, hoping for understanding. Some listeners genuinely care. Others quietly memorize weaknesses. Machiavelli believed human nature contains both empathy and opportunism at the same time. That's why emotional wisdom matters. Not everybody deserves unrestricted access to someone's inner world simply because they ask for it. A practical example appears in everyday life, more often than people realize. Imagine someone constantly posting emotional breakdowns online during every difficult phase. At first, friends offer support and encouragement, but over time, repeated exposure changes perception. Some begin associating that person entirely with instability or emotional chaos. Others lose respect unconsciously, even if they never say it directly. Meanwhile, manipulative personalities recognize patterns immediately: fear of abandonment, need for reassurance, dependence on attention. Psychology teaches that repeated emotional broadcasting trains people how to emotionally position you in their minds. That's why emotionally intelligent individuals learn when to speak openly and when to process pain privately. A wise mentor once said something that sounded cold initially but became more profound with time. Protect your emotional wounds while they're healing, not because emotions are shameful, but because unfinished pain makes people highly impressionable. Someone in emotional desperation often accepts toxic friendships, weak boundaries, fake love, or empty validation simply to avoid loneliness. And honestly, almost everybody has experienced this at some point. That desperate need to feel seen can make intelligent people ignore obvious red flags. True control begins when someone learns to validate themselves internally before seeking emotional confirmation from the outside world. Confidence grows differently when it's built privately instead of performed publicly. The deeper lesson here is not isolation. It's emotional sovereignty. A strong person can still love deeply, trust carefully, and connect authentically without surrendering ownership of their identity. They stop begging for attention. They stop explaining their worth constantly. They stop exposing every emotional storm to the public just to feel temporarily understood. And strangely enough, the less someone needs validation, the more naturally respected they become. Because emotional independence creates a presence people can feel immediately. Yet once external approval loses its grip, a far more difficult challenge quietly emerges, facing the mind itself in complete silence, without distractions, applause, or emotional escape routes. By this point, the speaker reveals the deeper pattern connecting all these behaviors together: oversharing plans, complaining publicly, reacting emotionally, gossiping, chasing validation, exposing vulnerability carelessly. All of them leak power, little by little. Most people never notice the loss because it happens psychologically before it happens externally. Machiavelli understood that influence is often shaped by perception long before action enters the picture. A person who speaks less, reacts less, and reveals less becomes difficult to predict, and unpredictability creates a strange form of authority. People instinctively hesitate around individuals they cannot emotionally read easily. Silence stops being awkward and starts becoming strategic. The speaker describes this state almost like becoming socially untouchable. Not because nobody criticizes you, but because fewer people gain emotional access to control your reactions. Imagine two individuals facing disrespect. One instantly defends ego, argues loudly, explains everything, and seeks validation from the room. The other remains composed, says little, and refuses emotional chaos entirely. Which person appears stronger, psychologically? Usually, the calm one. Human psychology associates emotional steadiness with internal control. That doesn't mean silence solves every conflict magically like some movie scene where the mysterious guy walks away while dramatic music plays in the background. But emotional discipline changes how people approach you over time. There's also a hidden advantage to speaking less that most people overlook completely. Observation improves. When someone stops obsessing over being understood constantly, they begin noticing details others miss. Tone changes, nervous behaviors, fake confidence, manipulation disguised as kindness. Machiavelli believed people revealed themselves naturally if given enough space to speak freely. That's why strategic silence becomes powerful. While others rush to fill every quiet moment with unnecessary words, the observant person gathers information calmly and honestly. Most manipulation fails immediately against individuals who observe carefully instead of reacting impulsively. Emotional control protects perception from distortion. A mentor once compared self-mastery to training a wild horse. At first, the mind resists constantly. It wants instant reactions, emotional release, external approval, attention, revenge, reassurance. Most people obey every impulse automatically without questioning it. Someone criticizes them, anger explodes. Someone ignores them, insecurity appears. Someone succeeds, envy whispers quietly inside. But the disciplined person begins interrupting these automatic reactions little by little. They pause before speaking. They observe before responding. They detach from emotional noise long enough to choose behavior consciously. That's where real power begins forming. Not over other people, but over oneself. And surprisingly, self-control intimidates manipulative personalities more than aggression ever could. But then the speaker introduces the final paradox, and it changes the entire conversation completely. Once external distractions disappear, another battlefield appears internally. Silence exposes thoughts people normally escape from through noise, entertainment, gossip, attention, or social validation. Without constant stimulation, insecurities become louder, regrets surface, fear appears. Vulnerability stops hiding behind performance. This is why many people avoid true silence entirely. It forces confrontation with the self. Machiavelli warned about controlling the external world, but mastering the internal world may be even harder. Because defeating external enemies means little if the mind itself remains chaotic and undisciplined. In the end, becoming untouchable has less to do with domination and more to do with inner stability. The calmest person in the room is often the one who no longer needs to prove everything constantly. They understand that words can weaken, reactions can expose, and emotional dependence can quietly imprison the mind. So they move differently. They protect peace carefully. They observe more than they explain. And while most people continue fighting for attention in the noisy theater of public life, they begin discovering something much rarer beneath all that silence: themselves. Now, the real question is no longer whether the world is manipulating people. The real question is whether someone is finally ready to stop being emotionally controlled by everything around them. Because once a person understands psychology deeply, they start noticing patterns everywhere. The loudest person in the room often hides the most insecurity. The one seeking endless validation usually feels empty internally. And the people who can't control their emotions publicly often surrender their power without even realizing it. Machiavelli understood something timeless. The world respects emotional control far more than emotional chaos. But here's the uncomfortable part. Nobody can escape. Knowledge alone changes nothing. A person can watch videos, read books, study power, learn about silence, understand vulnerability, and still remain trapped in the same emotional habits forever. Real transformation only begins when somebody applies these lessons during ordinary moments, during arguments, during rejection, during humiliation, during success, during loneliness. That's where self-mastery becomes real. Not in theory, but in behavior. So, the next time someone provokes you publicly, will you react instantly or remain calm enough to keep control? The next time you feel the urge to announce every plan, every emotion, every frustration online, will you pause long enough to ask yourself who truly benefits from that exposure? And most importantly, if all external validation disappeared tomorrow, would you still know your own worth in silence? Because the truth is, most people spend their entire lives trying to control other people while remaining prisoners of their own emotions. And that's the greatest weakness of all. The person who masters themselves becomes difficult to manipulate, difficult to intimidate, and almost impossible to emotionally dominate. That kind of power doesn't come from status, money, or attention. It comes from inner stability, something very few people ever truly develop. If this video changed the way you see human behavior, take a moment and ask yourself honestly, which of these mistakes have been silently weakening your life until now, and which one will you stop doing first? Drop your answer in the comments below. Sometimes, one small shift in awareness changes everything. And if you want to continue learning about psychology, power, emotional control, silence, and the timeless strategies hidden inside human nature, subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and activate the notifications. Because the people who understand these lessons early usually move through life very differently from everyone else.